is going on, my friends? Welcome in. Wednesday edition of the Daily Dime here at FTNFantasy.com. My name is Zac Graham, aka Kawaisenberg DFS, ready to go through tonight's 10-game NBA slate. We'll talk DFS. We'll talk some prop picks, maybe a little pick six action in there as well. We'll let everybody file in here first couple minutes. How'd everybody do last night? Guess if you were invested in the New York Knicks, it didn't go great, right? But basketball is back. Pretty crazy watching the first 3.5 quarters of Boston and what they did from a shooting perspective, and then how that game finished. Right? With 12 or 13 straight missed threes. Tough. Then we get the moment with Bron and Bronny. And that was cool. But even from those couple minutes, right? For anybody who was maybe on the fence, right? Maybe you hadn't seen Bronny, didn't really know where he's at. Right? Like, he's not ready. You could tell that just from those couple minutes. Would have been cool to see him knock down that three, though, right? Or the little tip in. All right, everybody, let's go ahead and jump in here. Again, 10 games. Excuse me. 10 games on tonight's slate. And today I actually want to start out talking about things from the DFS perspective. Because I don't think I have seen something like this before, where even on an opening night, right, where usually we've got all of the injury reports in, right, there's not a ton of questionable tags hanging out there on an opening night slate or even just in the first week. But there is like no value on DraftKings tonight. And I know in the Discord you guys were already discussing the slate from that type of perspective here this morning. I think I like it, at least for now. But it was a little bit eye-opening last night, opening up a contest to build a placeholder lineup and really struggling again to find any sort of value that I feel confident in. Now there are a few pieces, right? But maybe it's a little bit of the recency bias coming off preseason where you can, most nights play whoever you want. But it's interesting. I've got a number of 4 care below plays that I think we can take a look at here tonight. But I also think, given the lack of value options, that those couple that do kind of stand out, I think a lot of ownership is probably going to coalesce around that group of more popular values. So it'd be something to keep an eye on in the ownership projections throughout the day. And here at FTN, right, I took a look at our first run here. There's a couple teams that need to be a little bit more dialed in here. So we'll get to that shortly, but let's jump into the slate. Again, I don't want to go game by game here on the Daily Dime, especially when we have a 10-game slate, but maybe a little position by position today, considering we have so much to really talk through and to digest here. With this being the first game for all 20 of these teams. It appears to be landscaping time at my neighbor's house, so if you can hear that, I apologize, but we're going to have to push through the old leaf blowers there. From a wide view, right, you always want to look at the implied totals, the spreads in these games, of course. Really just one game that kind of sits below the rest from an implied total standpoint. You've got the Magic visiting the Heat. That's a 208.5 implied total right now over there on DK Sportsbook. The next lowest total, 221.5. That's in Portland, where we've got a little West Coast matchup there, Warriors and Blazers. But I think for me, looking at that huge discrepancy between the Heat Magic game and the rest of this 10-game slate, right, you never want to completely ignore a game just because of the total from the start. But I think that gives us a nice kind of first piece to the puzzle here, where it's going to be tough to get players from that game because, again, there's not a ton of standout value there, at least on DraftKings. I think we can talk about, like in that game, for example, over on FanDuel, right? You've got a guy like Cole Anthony who's 4K. So like there is some like usable value in that game over on FanDuel. But there's also, I think, more usable value as a whole on FanDuel. So we can kind of, I guess, blend maybe point and shooting guards together. And if you're tuned in here live, you can drop your comments, your questions into the YouTube chat. We can certainly discuss anything that you may have your eye on. If you're an FTN Fantasy subscriber, you can also, chat here with me in the Discord. But, and if you're watching this on replay later in the afternoon, definitely ping me in the Discord channel there. Sorry, just catching up on some things in the chat there. So talking about guards, especially at the top end, right? There's a lot of guys here that I think we can and will be interested in, and so will the field, right? Pacers Pistons, which is the lone 7:00 game here on this slate, looks pretty good from a fantasy standpoint, right? You got your 9.3K Halliburton there on DraftKings. Okay, I see Shazam saying that the here tag didn't notify him, so we'll go reply. Everyone. There we go. That should work. See if we get a couple more subs filing in here now. You've got Trae Young, 9,900. I think Giannis is expected to play, right? Probable. But Joel Embiid is out. We discussed the Embiid situation a little bit on yesterday's Dime. So Trae Young, second highest priced player on this slate. Remember, DeJounte Murray out of town now. So if you're going up into this range, Trae Young looks pretty great to me. Brooklyn is going to be one of the worst teams in the league this year, right? I think the win total coming into the season was sub 20. So with no DeJounte Murray there now, I think there's a lot of merit to going to Trae at his price. But again, that price today, 9,900, typically on any regular season slate isn't as prohibitive as it feels today. You can get there, right? I had a placeholder that I set last night. Let me pull that back up. Where I've got two guys over 9K in that placeholder. So it can be done. But I also think we're going to see, once the ownership projections get a little bit more fleshed out here this afternoon, change a couple of these minutes around in our projections, you're going to see pretty flat ownerships, I think, among these like 8.5K and above guards, right? Because I'm talking about Trae, but Ja Morant is back. Pretty good matchup against Utah on the road tonight. 228.5 total in that one, which I think is third highest on this slate. Tyrese Halliburton we talked about against the Pistons. That game with the highest implied total. 9,300 for Hallie feels pretty good. James Harden, 9,200. Paul George out of town. Kawhi Leonard out. If the Clippers are going to stay in this game, it's going to likely be behind a big James Harden performance, right? You got the Suns 5-point road favorites in that nightcap. That's a 10 p.m. Eastern start. But James Harden was the last guy in to my placeholder lineup. Hallie made it in. Harden made it in. I would be fine using Trae or Ja. I'm going to have shares of those guys in my MME build tonight. LaMelo Ball against Houston. Not a fantastic matchup against this Ime Udoka coached Rockets team, right? Hornets 8-point road dogs here. Biggest underdogs on the 10-game slate. But LaMelo sub 9K. I'm going to have some shares. Tyrese Maxey with no Joel Embiid, right? Sixers taking on the Bucks. I believe that's the early game on ESPN tonight, if I'm not mistaken. Sixers just 3.5-point home dogs here with no Embiid and no Paul George. 223 implied total. I think you got to have some interest in 9K Maxey as well. And we can talk about Andre Drummond at like 7-ish K, I think, at center as we go here. But again, right, Donovan Mitchell against Toronto. On the other side of that Pacers-Detroit game, Cade Cunningham coming off a fantastic preseason at 8,600. So right now of that group, right, 8.5K and above at the guard position. My two favorites would be Hallie and James Harden. Of course, if that changes, and you'll see in my cores today in the optimizer, closer to lock, those will always be in there an hour before lock at the latest. If that changes, you guys will know. But those would be my first two guards that I'm looking at here on DraftKings. Anybody else have a favorite guard in that spend up range? Again, like I mentioned, I got both Hallie and Harden into my placeholder. So there is value we can use to get multiple expensive guys. It doesn't have to be a guard, of course. And if we look over there on FanDuel, right, in terms of those top priced guards, right, similar over there. Maxey a little bit higher in the pricing hierarchy, 9.6K. Over there on FanDuel, Harden 9.3, John 9.4. So all those same kind of guys in that range, right? LaMelo 9.7. So I think the second highest price guard over on FanDuel. Reese sub 9K on DraftKings. I don't have a placeholder in yet for FanDuel. But I know looking at Tyrese Halliburton 8.8K over there, that's tough for me to get away from against the Pistons. Cade just $100 less on the other side. I don't hate that either. I could also see some ownership kind of really stacking up on somebody like Emmanuel Quickley, sub 8K there, right? No RJ Barrett for the Raptors tonight, going up against the Cavs. But I could see him pulling some significant interest there at a little bit more modest of a price. She says, "What we talking about, player props or just fantasy?" Yeah, we're going to talk about some props along the way. We're going to talk about props along the way. But because we have so many games here tonight, she wanted to kind of touch on. And it's really challenging for the DFS players tonight, especially on DraftKings. But we can get to one of those props right now, Sheed. One that I have a lot of interest in here today, and I guess let me pull up Prize Picks and Underdog here just so I can have the most up-to-date lines that they've put out there. Looking more in the mid-range at guard on DraftKings. Emmanuel Quickley right there at 7,200. Again, I think going to pick up some interest from the field. Not a great matchup for the Bulls here, but Josh Giddey $100 cheaper than IQ is somebody that I'm looking at both on the DFS side and in the prop streets. Let me get over to Giddey here. Last I checked, his PRA was at 25. Still at 25. I like a more than selection there on Giddey's PRA. Right, I talked a lot about in the preseason, like Futures article on the Fast Break podcast. I talked a lot about what I think Josh Giddey is going to do from a statistical standpoint this year here in Chicago. It's certainly still a crowded backcourt, right? But I think he's going to have the opportunity to kind of make this backcourt his, so to speak, as we move throughout the season. I want to say he played he was just under 25 minutes per game in his 4 preseason outings. And again, we shouldn't be using preseason as a one-to-one comparison of what's going to happen in regular season play. But I do think we shouldn't ignore it completely, especially for guys that are in these new situations, right? So Giddey, just under 24 minutes per game in the preseason and just over 21 PRA per game in those, we'll call it 24 minutes. This is a guy I expect to play 30, 32 minutes a night for this team, right? The Bulls have no delusions of competing for a title this year, right? Giddey, they traded for him on this expiring deal, so he's trying to earn that extension from Chicago, right? And as much has been made about, right, Josh Giddey, the off the court stuff, I'm not considering that when I'm thinking about, prop plays or slotting him into a DFS lineup. This is a guy that's going to contribute across the box score. I think we get back to more of what we saw years 1 and 2 out of Josh Giddey compared to last year, right, where his minutes got cut year over year by 6 minutes per game. That's pretty significant, right? And so, like, when you go from Oklahoma City, who's looking to get the 1 seed overall in the league, not just the Western Conference this year, right? And Giddey could sometimes be a little bit redundant offensively with some of the guards they have there. And, of course, his defensive struggles are why he lost so much time last year. That and the development, draft Cason Wallace, development of other guys off the bench, Aaron Wiggins, Isaiah Joe, and the like. But I think we get back to more like year before last, 31 minutes a game for Josh Giddey, 16.5 points, 8 boards, 6 assists, over a stock per game. Like, that's what I think we're seeing out of Josh Giddey this year. So I think that PRA line on Giddey at 25 is 2 or 3 points too low right now. I think we see that settle in the high 20s once the season really gets kind of rolling here over the first couple of weeks. So that would be the first pick I wanted to highlight today, Sheed. And I see here you say, I'll get to these other questions, comments that we've got here, but just finishing off because Sheed wanted that prop play. Do I think Lonzo gets minutes? Yeah, he's going to be restricted. I think I saw 12 to 16 here tonight, if I'm not mistaken. And again, right, it's Giddey and Lonzo and Kobe and Ayo Dosunmu and Zach LaVine slotting in there as a combo guard wing, right? But to me, out of all those guys, who do they have the most incentive to me to play, to give time, to, again, allow him to kind of make this backcourt his, to me, is Josh Giddey, right? Kid just turned 22 2 weeks ago. This is still a very young player with a pretty darn good profile, in my eyes, from a basketball standpoint. I think Chicago is going, again, they have to make that decision this year. I think they're going to end up investing in the future of Josh Giddey in Chicago. So getting back to a little bit of the DFS talk, and we can keep it moving here. Again, we want the Daily Dime to be hovering around 30, 40 minutes Monday through Friday. So Shazam's in here saying guard prices in the value zone look a little bit more favorable on FanDuel than DK. I think I agree. 6.8K Garland, a lot of options under 6K too. Yeah, I think like overall, AJ, right? Like I just feel like FanDuel is a little bit easier to build on today. Right, because even if we're not just looking at guard, right? A lot of 5K guys, right? Norman Powell. We talked about James Harden earlier, but like now we've got Normie in a starting role. So 5.1K guard forward eligible over there on FanDuel. Like, is Strus out? That's something that I may have missed. Yeah, so we're missing Max Strus today, right? Oh, that's right. He's out a while. So does Karis LeVert start, right? Could maybe be Dean Wade, I guess, unless I missed an announcement from Coach Atkinson there. Like Karis LeVert, 5.5K, guard forward. Marcus Smart, 5.5K. Jaren Jackson's out. You would think Zach Edey's going to start here tonight, 5.3K on FanDuel. They're saying it's a little bit easier overall to be building lineups on FanDuel, or at least like to be fitting guys in comfortably that you feel really good about, right? Like I'm sitting here on DraftKings considering, am I going to use like Cody Martin tonight from the Hornets? I don't know if he's going to get enough time to really be viable, but those are the types of guys we're thinking about here on night freaking 1, right? Yeah, crazy. Yeah, and just turned 22. There's a cat guy. Good to see it in here. Point guard eligible, Amen Thompson making the leap this year. Starts tonight. Yeah, I still got a lot of Amen Thompson stock here. It only really he's going to play a bigger role this year than he did last year. He's their sixth man now. And because of his positional versatility, I know I'm just kind of dovetailing into actual basketball talk here, but it's early in the season. You can have an injury to almost any of the 5 positions on Houston and just slot Amin Thompson in. Guy was playing some small ball center at the end of last season. All right, so we can get back to a little bit of business here, right? Quickly, Giddey in that low 7K range on DraftKings. I think Van Vliet at 7.4 is certainly somebody that you should have in your player pool if you're building an MME set here tonight. The cat guy, like for me, like Amin on this slate, right? Still guard forward eligible, so we like to see that going forward. Like I did see that DraftKings made the ridiculous decision to listen to Shams about Herb Jones, and Herb Jones is center only. Come on. So we've got Giannis participating in shoot around. So he's listed probable, right? So we would assume, already assuming that he was going to give it a go here on opening night. Yeah, we can talk about, right? I don't want to pass over somebody like Zach LaVine. Skyline saying LaVine with DeMar DeRozan out of town seems like a good play at 7.3K here on DraftKings, guard forward eligible. He'd be a secondary option for me. Yeah, and Kruger's saying there are so many good plays tonight and so little valuable to be able to fit everyone in. I think that's a way to put it here. So continuing to kind of just scroll down here, like I think I'm more likely to end up in this low 6K range at guard than that like low to mid 7K range. Because I want exposure to Pacers Pistons, even though that like we've talked about a lot in the past, right? About the value of like pushing back salary on an average slate like this when you get 10 games and you have a lot of Q tags hanging out there once you get a couple weeks into the season. But the injury report is not like that tonight. And so I have fewer reservations about locking in my salary early on this slate than I would on your typical slate once we get into the meat of the season. So getting exposure right, I said I had Hallie in that placeholder. I came back on the other side of that game in my shooting guard spot with Jaden Ivey. And one thing about Jaden Ivey that I think is really interesting to start the year is the fact that we've got a new coach there, right? Monty is down in my neck of the woods now. He's down I-35 in San Antonio coaching high school ball now. And so, gone are the days. We can't even play Killian Hayes anymore because he's off the team. Killian Hayes was closing games last year over Jaden Ivey at times, right? So I think we're going to get a little bit more Jaden Ivey freedom in terms of the minutes. And I think the 6K in this matchup against the Pacers looks pretty nice. Again, on a slate where we're struggling for value and maybe need to find those gems in the mid-range that can put us over the top. So if I'm looking for exposure to this Detroit side, Jaden Ivey is up there for me. And then $100 more, you've got Colin Sexton at home hosting Memphis. Right, and it's the Coach Hardy's rotations can be a little bit frustrating at times, but Colin Sexton, right, Young Bull is still a good fantasy producer. It's over a point per minute last year, I believe. Yeah, well over, right, 31 DK in about 26 minutes a game. So if you can give me, upper 28, 30 minutes of Colin Sexton at 6,100 tonight, I don't hate that. But again, just trying to highlight some guys in that area, in that price tier, that kind of stick out to me a little bit here at the guard position on DraftKings. This pricing is just tough, man. Like Norm Powell, 58, Ben Simmons, 59. If you just chop like $500 to $1,000 off almost everybody in this 6 to 5K range, then we're just swimming in value. But how it is right now, Herb should just be an asterisk. Yeah, I mean, he's not a center. AJ, yeah, 5.9K Ivy on FanDuel. That's nice as well. You've got Tyus Jones, right? It's going to play the 1 for the Suns. 5,500. Again, you chop $500 off that price. Now we're really talking. It doesn't really stand out to me all that much. And so looking at trying to find some cheaper guard value than that, it's pretty sparse. Like looking for like sub 4.5K guards. Like if there's anybody that you guys see that you have interest in, right? Like, I don't know, man. I like Kevin Porter Jr. still a lot from a fantasy standpoint, but 4,800 feels like a pretty full price on a guy that could be splitting minutes with a Bones Highland type. Right? Grady Dick's 4,700. With RJ Barrett out, like I think and Bruce Brown out too, like I think he's still in this starting five, but 4,700 with IQ, with Scotty, it's tough. There you go. Pokey Zach in here says, thoughts on Grady Dick? Playable. 0% excited about it. And I really think that that's a play that could tank your lineup. I would almost rather go Dylan Brooks at the same price. And I don't want to play Dylan Brooks. But this is kind of where we're at, right? Hey, there's Josh. Looking like a timer. All right, JJ. Suggs and Eric Gordon. 4,500, right? Shorthanded Philly. I don't know, man. Eric Gordon has had plenty of opportunity over the last couple of years in spots where he's going to get elevated minutes. He's just not a good fantasy producer anymore. Pajemski, if he starts, though, that is a good. I'm glad you brought that one up, Shazam. Pajemski at 5K, if he got the start, would be one of the best plays on the slate for me. Against Portland. And that's kind of like, you know, can you slot him into your utility spot, right? Because maybe if Pods is off the bench, maybe you're going bigger than, and you've got Trace Jackson Davis starting for $100 less. TJD gets the start at 4,900. I have some love for that. I think he's 47 on FanDuel. But unless I missed news on, right? Did I miss news on them naming a starting five? Coach Kerr, rather. Lemon says, yeah, Moses Moody, what, 3,300, I think? Yeah, 3,300. I don't think he's going to start. But he's going to be a part of this rotation this year. Right, I think you're locked in here. Steph, Wiggins, Draymond, Kuminga. I don't think we're going to see Steve Kerr go back to Kuminga off the bench. So then are you going bigger with Jackson Davis, or are you going smaller? And you could go smaller and it not be Pajemski. It could be DeAnthony Melton. And based off what I was reading like a week ago, DeAnthony Melton might be the favorite here to get the start. See Brian saying, quick question, how do you normally build based off Opto or article or a bit of both? I mean, for me, it's Opto. It's also just kind of my own thoughts. Like, a lot of NBA DFS for me is actually watching the games, which is not super. It can be, right? That can be detrimental to your more casual player, right? Because if you don't have time to sit here like I do most nights and watch 10 NBA games, you know, obviously you're not catching every single possession, but rotations and watching how these guys look and how they play with each other, what the coaches are doing, right? Making sure you go in the next morning and looking at those rotations on a popcorn machine or an AMF or something like that. But in terms of just building the lineups, I think the main thing for me is trusting the data that we have here at FTN Fantasy, especially when it's dialed in right before lock, early in the season here. GPP scores as well. I know Alex is in the chat right now giving some of that strategy talk. So if you're an NBA sub here, or an FTN sub rather, get in that NBA channel, you can see what Alex is talking about right now. Zaire Williams, huh? Josh, what is with you and the like second and third string Brooklyn guys? You were Noah Clowney. You were the king of the Noah Clowney fan club last year. I'm on board this year. He's gonna get some time. Right, we've still got a shorthanded front court there in Brooklyn. Right, you've got Watford out, you've got Sharp out. Bojan's not back either on the wing. Claxton's gonna play. And you know they'll run Simmons out there at the 5-2. I don't think it's Zaire for me. Right? Like, starting groups probably Cam, Schroeder, Claxton, Finney Smith. I would think Simmons comes off the bench. At least in this one, with Claxton back in. But we'll see. I don't know if I can get to Zaire tonight. So we can talk more about kind of the forward spin-ups here. So you were told Zaire was going to get a lot of run today. Source me. Link me. Let me see it. Card says, do you think Kerr goes 10 plus deep? Let's count them out. Right, starters, Steph, Dre, Kuminga, Wiggins. We'll put Trace Jackson Davis. So then bench, Buddy, Pajemski, Melton, Slow-Mo, Looney, Moody, Peyton. That's probably the 12 you see. Maybe you don't get Looney tonight. Maybe. I think all those other guys touch the floor. Again, really with Golden State on DraftKings, at least I'm looking at Pajemski and Jackson Davis and hoping one of those guys start. Kuminga 6,500 isn't terrible either. Especially if you're looking on the late slate, right? Let's jump to the props here again, because Sheed has a good one here. That looks like a Prize Picks prop to me. Giddy Murray, 13.5 assist combo. Is that a trap? I don't think it's a trap. That's not one that stood out to me when I was kind of scanning the board earlier today. But you put the Nerf gun to my head and said, Zach, you got to choose a side on this. I'm leaning towards the over there. For sure. I would take the over there. Oh boy. All right, we'll divert over to the Prize Picks board here, because those of you that know me know I love the fantasy score props on both Prize Picks and Underdog. Let's see what we've got here. The Jaden Ivey 27 is not bad. Looking for an over there. TJ McConnell, 23.5. I'll have to take a look at that again. On the surface, that feels like it could be ripe for an under. But it's going to be close. Cam Thomas, 33.5. That's not terrible. Trey, 43.5. See Skyline asking a question there in chat. Talking about centers. We'll get to centers here in a second. Andre Drummond, 33.5. I'm going to like an over there. Or a more than, rather. Brandon Clark fantasy prop. We'll talk Brandon Clark here in a second from a DFS perspective. Harden 44 feels like that could be ripe for an over. I don't. Is Scoot Henderson going to start here? I don't think so. Ayton, Simons, Avdia, Grant. I would think Chauncey would. I would think Chauncey would run Scoot out there, but maybe not. If Scoot starts, Scoot 22.5 is pretty great. And I know people don't like to go heavy on Scoot, but I've still got some stock in old Scoot Henderson there. So, Sheed, if you're looking on Prize Picks there, anybody else, some of those fantasy score props that stand out to me, I think the top two for me right now would be Drummond, more than 33.5 fantasy score. That feels pretty good. James Harden, more than 44 up against the Suns. Scoot for most improved. Yeah. Uphill battle for old Scoot there in that race. It's looking at forwards, right? Much less to spend up on at the forward position. The only guy over 9K is 11K Giannis. It's damn near impossible to get Giannis in tonight. At least unless we get some, something kind of, news that we don't expect him. All of a sudden we've got value or better value. Siakam 8,300 though is another good way to get exposure to the Pacers if you don't want to spend all the way up on Howie. But of those 8K and above guys, right, your Zions, as long as he plays, I expect him to. Zion, Siakam, Paolo, KD, Scotty Barnes. It's going to be Scotty for me at 8,900. Again, Paolo, even at 85, it's tough to get there in that game against Miami. And same with Jimmy at 8,100. If I'm getting down into that mid to high 7K range, like Jalen Johnson at 78 stands out. Again, a way to get exposure from that Atlanta side up against Brooklyn without spending all the way up on Trey, right? You're saving 2K there, 2.1K. Markkanen 7,500 feels good. Again, the Memphis-Utah game. There's a number of pieces there that I think are pretty attractive on this slate. Really tough in the 5 to 6K range here. Really tough. I mentioned Kuminga at 6,500 earlier. Talked about Markkanen. Kelly Oubre 6'4". Could be a little bit interesting there. Obviously, if for some reason Giannis sat, which again, he's went through shoot around, he's listed probable, he should very much play. But obviously, Bobby Portis 6,100 would become one of the most popular plays on the slate, and for good reason. So talking about some of those values, right? I want to keep an eye, see what I can find on somebody like Cody Martin, because if we're going down all the way to the bargain basement bin here, right, down near 3K, 3.1K, guard forward eligible Cody Martin, played just one preseason game, and I think just got only 8 minutes. So this is probably too early to be looking at Cody Martin, right? Because we're going to need him to play at least 18 minutes, but ideally into the low 20s to be comfortable slotting him in there. But that is how I tied that placeholder together last night. If you look up a little bit higher in terms of the pricing here on some forward options, one guy that stands out to me is Chris Boucher, who did not have a ton of fantasy success last year, was actually under a fantasy point per minute last season, where he's always been the god of going out there for 15 minutes and giving you 30 fantasy points. Not the guy, right? He's not Boban. He's always been a very, very viable fantasy asset when he's going to get time. And the Raptors are shorthanded. Right? It's not the best matchup in the world against Cleveland, but no Bruce Brown, no RJ Barrett, and most importantly for Boucher, no Kelly Olynyk. Right, so for a guy that's power forward center eligible, just 4K. For me on DraftKings, he makes a lot of sense as things stand now. as a value that, again, I don't think is going to get a ton of attention ownership-wise. And we know has a massive fantasy upside. Right? Raptors are 6.5-point home dogs here. I would think that Boucher would play garbage time as well. Right? They can run Bruno Fernando out there. But I think Boucher is the one, like looking at how they ran the preseason, how Coach Darko ran his preseason rotations, that it's going to be Boucher as that backup center here. Or maybe you get some Fernando, but Boucher is going to be in this rotation here tonight. And for a slate so devoid of value, I think Boucher might be back in our lives here in game one. Card says, looks like we get value from the Pelicans bench. Maybe let's check out the Pels. Right, so I believe DJ was at shoot around this morning. He's got a personal issue. That's why he's on the injury report. Okay, Zion. Yeah. Good call. So this was actually while I was live here, and maybe I just X'd through that notification. But Zion, he's on the injury report with an illness. Not at shoot around. Okay, and this is already a team that, again, we're talking about Herb Jones playing freaking center. So if you're missing Zion, it's going to give you a boost to DJ. It's going to give you a boost to Ingram, boost to CJ McCollum, who will definitely be in the starting lineup then. Trey Murphy still out with the hamstring. Jose Alvarado is questionable. Right, so Jordan Hawkins maybe, 3,600. He was so bad last year. It was a rookie year, right? But just inconsistent. Some real terrible shooting nights. That continued in Summer League too this past July, if I recall correctly. But right, Daniel Tice there. Herb Jones center only 5,500. Just can't play him. And let's talk about center real quick, before I shut this down here. No Yabusele. Not for me. I love me some French Draymond. Like, having Gershon back in the league is great. And I guess what flat min price, you could run some Gershon. But again, my interest in Philly is mostly still 7K Andre Drummond. Which feels like really safe floor. Still an awesome ceiling even at that price. But that's a good call out by you there, Josh. On Gershon min price. Again, we're hurting for value, so anything that can be viable there, sub 4K, we're going to have to look at and consider. Alex says, a little hesitant to go back to my favorite props tonight. Unders on steals and turnovers, with the idea that these early games are sloppy. Any thoughts there? I don't think that's inherently wrong at all. Maybe a little bit more hesitant on the turnovers, right? Maybe a little bit more hesitant to go back to the unders on the turnovers there. Maybe if you're thinking also guys in new spots, right? Maybe still a little bit disconnected, right? Even some of these teams, right? I know some of them play 6 preseason games, but most of these guys don't play in all the games. And they've only been together for about 3 weeks now, going back to when they were first starting practice early in the month. So maybe we're avoiding, right? Maybe we're avoiding those turnover unders for now. Zaire Yabusele lets you play whoever you want. Yeah, but like, to me, I think Yabusele is in a different category than Zaire. Like, tell me where you saw that Zaire's going to play a ton. I'm not doubting that that's out there. I just haven't been able to go through that, net specific news. Was that Christian Winfield still beat writing for them? Is this right? Is there really only one turnover prop on Prize Picks right now, Alex? I know you're limited there, right? So you're not as big of a Prize Picks fan as some of the other sites right now. I'm looking at just Marcus Smart as the only turnover prop that they're offering. Interesting. Steals much more expansive, right? Because they'll just throw a demon on somebody's steals there. Net source. Yeah, where though? Do I like Bam over threes? Olympics he was chucking. I mean, Olympics and this. I don't think we should be comparing those two competitions. NBA regular season and Olympic tournament. Yeah, I agree. And they also, right, they may have had more up earlier this morning and just gotten bombarded if they had some easy lines, some soft lines out there. So talking about the center position here tonight, I mentioned Andre Drummond, right? There's plenty of playable guys up here. Your high 7Ks for the two Cleveland guys, Bam 8,200, Vooch 83. If I'm going up that high at center, above Drummond at 7K, I'm passing on all those dudes. Give me Şengün against Nick Richards in Charlotte, 8,600. Drummond and Şengün, definitely my top two center only options there on DraftKings in that upper tier. 6K range, there's a couple guys that you could have some interest in. Just secondary in terms of priority for me here, but I think Pirtle 6,500 with no Kelly O. I don't want to pair Pirtle and Boucher together. But then $300 cheaper, you've got Zach Edey with Triple J out. 6,200 feels about right for me right now on Zach Edey. So he'll be in my pool. It's not a priority, but I think he's in play there. Kessler on the other side, 5,500. Should remain in that starting role that we've seen him in throughout the preseason. Again, if Trace Jackson Davis started sub 5K, I'd have some interest there. I think $4,000 Nick Richards. Just because we don't have a ton of value, that's going to probably be one of the highest owned sub 4K or below, rather, plays on the slate. And I think it's pretty good chalk. Like Mark Williams still working his way back from the foot strain. Right? Who's behind him in this front court? Grant Williams? I don't think we're running Taj Gibson or Musa Diabate out there for big minutes. So Nick Richards 4K. Again, I think he's going to be pretty massively owned if everything kind of holds in terms of availability. So again, Grant Williams should play backup center minutes there. 4,600 power forward center eligible is not crazy. It's in that range too, right? Santi Aldama should start at the 4 next to Zach Edey against Utah. I don't hate that if you're looking for a 5K guy. Daniel Tice is the immediate price pivot off of Richards at 4K. But I think I would prefer, if I'm going really cheap at center, back to Memphis, Utah. $3,700 Brandon Clark. With no Triple J, right? I mean, he's going to play a role in this rotation regardless of front court availability, but I think we can get him up into the, low to mid 20s here. And for a guy that even coming off the Achilles last year was still a +1 fantasy point per minute type of asset, 3,700 for Brandon Clark. He was in my placeholder there. Maybe you're going double center value and you're going Richards and Clark. That could open up a good bit of spending power too. And Clark and Richards, two of my favorite values right now on the board. Both, unfortunately, only center on DK. Josh had beef stew. Right, so Isaiah Stewart now in the backup center role. Of course, been the Isaiah Stewart power forward experiment the last few years. You can do that. Not as interested in beef stew as Richards or Clark for a few $100s cheaper. So, again, I guess click over to FanDuel here. Just make sure we're not missing anything crazy that's standing out right now in terms of center. Right, scrolling down a little bit. I talked about Jackson Davis, 4.7, just $600 more for Edie over there. Edie at 5,300. That looks pretty nice on FanDuel. Tice 39 down there. Clark 44, but you can also get Clark at power forward. And again, less of a necessity over there on FanDuel. Pace makes you like beef stew. Yeah, sure. I mean, again, getting pieces of Pistons Pacers is something I want to do tonight. I think we're coming up on an hour here. Again, 10 games. A little bit disjointed here to start. We'll dial this in a little bit more as we go. Just 4 games tomorrow. And Sheed, if Sheed's still around, we'll make sure to have more prop picks so we can hit some of those right off the bat. So you don't have to hang around and listen to a full type of slate breakdown. So I appreciate everybody tuning in, sticking with me here on the Wednesday edition of the Daily Dime. Back tomorrow, same time, same place, talking about tomorrow's 4-game slate. Spurs first game, so get ready for some Spurkle jerking by me, some Wembanyama talk. DeJounte Murray over 7.5 assists. Yes, sir. I gave that out yesterday on yesterday's Daily Dime. Still like it. And on Underdog, let me check. Yesterday you were getting plus money on that. DeJounte. Oh, they took it down. If you can still find that out there, Josh, yeah, I like it. That's one I have in entries already. All right, everybody. Gonna shut it. Yeah, so now I see it on a refresh. Now you're getting 0.94x for the higher than 7.5 assists. So I hope everybody who was tuned in yesterday to the Daily Dime got some of those. I think it was 1.05x this time yesterday. So again, FTN Fantasy subscribers, you will get more analysis, more picks throughout the afternoon here. But just kind of a first look here at the slate. And it's going to be a tough one, especially on DraftKings. So appreciate everybody tuning in, sticking with me. I'll see you guys here tomorrow for another edition of the Daily Dime. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. See you tomorrow. Goodbye.